In this video, we're going to create the planet Mars for our lander. I'm starting out in the top view and I'm going to drop in a polygon sphere. And I'm going to start to scale up pretty big, and I can change this as I need when I get to the animation process. Jumping to the side view, I'm going to eliminate most of the sphere at the bottom. Right-clicking and choosing face. I'll start to select some, and maybe I'll stop right about here. I'll hit delete. Return to my object mode, center the pivot, freeze the transforms, and delete by type history. I'll move it down to my x-axis, and I'll go to my perspective view. I'll hit F on the keyboard to zoom in on it. Next, we're going to create a crater hole, and that's where the lander will pull our object out when it lands. I'm going to use my edge loop tool. I'll put an edge in right about here, and then I'll zoom in, right-click and choose face. Selecting a face, I'll hold down my space bar, and I'm going to go to Edit Mesh, and I'll choose Poke. And you'll see it splits it up into 4 triangles, and that's not quite enough. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to the upper right hand corner of the application, clicking on the little cube with the hammer, and I'm going to use the multi-cut tool. I've made sure that once I clicked on it in its attributes, I've set the snap back to 1. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to split this further, with each triangle being split in half again. Now I'll zoom in and I'll start to create where I'd like the opening to go. Once I have those set, hitting W on the keyboard, I'll right-click and choose face, and I'm going to select these faces in the center and delete them. Now I'm going to add a little more detail to the crater. Right-clicking, choosing edge, I'll double-click on the inside of the opening. I'll go to my extrude tool, and I'll click on the blue dial, and that'll allow me to pull up from the surface. And I'll start to scale it in a little bit. Clicking on my extrude tool or hitting G on the keyboard, I'll center the function. Again, I'll scale and pull it in to give it a little thickness. And I'll hit G on the keyboard or click on the extrude tool one more time, and I'll pull it down. And I'll save. Now that we've made the crater opening, we're going to go and put a little bit more texture on the surface. And to do that, we're going to be using our edge loop tool, and we'll be using a sculpting tool. But we need to add some faces. So I'll get my edge loop tool, and I guess I'll put one in maybe here. And then I'm going to select some of the faces out along the edge here. So I'll right-click, choose face, and it gets pretty subjective now how you want to do this, but I'll start by selecting a series of these polygon faces. And I could do this in more than one spot. Now that I've got the face selected, I need more geometry there, so I'll hold down my space bar, I'll go to Edit Mesh, I'm going to add divisions. I'm going to use the default setting of 1. I'll hit apply. You can see now we've got a bunch more faces to work with here. I'm going to add another tool to my shelf, and it appears to be an orange ball with kind of a white wedge on it. To get that sculpting tool, I'd hold down my Command or Control and Shift, and I would go to Mesh Tools, and I would go to Sculpting Tools and click on that first icon. Now once I've done that, I'll double click on it, and it shows up in its tool settings here on the right. And here you can change the size of the brush and the strength. And if you kind of turn it at the right angle, you're going to be able to, like maybe I'll start with 0.15 on the size of the brush. And you can actually see when you put your cursor over your geometry the size of that brush. And the strength, what works pretty well is started off really low. I'll put in 1, and then I'll drag on my surface. And you'll see that it starts to pull up that geometry. And the higher that number, obviously, so if I were to make it 3, you can see now it starts to pull up even more. So depending on the size of the brush and the strength. So it's something you really want to play with. Now the problem is that this is really really kind of computer intense. You can see now that I've got it up much higher. Now, bearing in mind that what we're going to be able to do is hit 3 on the keyboard when we render, or we can run a poly smooth on it. So what might be severe or seem too extreme when you're making it, make sure you go back and forth to 1 and 3 on your keypad to see what it actually will look like. If this process just is too intense for your computer, all we need to do now really and get kind of the same results would be to use our move tool with the soft select. So if you recall, you would hit W on the keyboard and then double click on the move tool over on your toolbar to get the attributes. And if you open up soft select and click on the button for soft select, you can see that by adjusting this number, it will affect a series of polygon faces wherever your selection is, and then dissipates out towards the edge of that selection. You can see it goes from yellow to red to black. So that would be the alternative if your computer isn't cooperating, and you'll get pretty much something acceptable with that as well. So if I were to hit 3 on the keyboard, I'll go back to my object mode, and you can see you can get something pretty close to what you would have gotten with the sculpting tool. Next, we're going to texture it.